They say death brings clarity, but when I died cold and alone on the streets, an illegal resident with no identity, no home, and no family, I didn't find peace. I found rage. Rage so sharp it cut through the numbness and carried me back. When I opened my eyes again, I was staring at Vanessa Collins, a woman who burned my Columbia University admission letter in my past life with that fake, innocent look on her face. And standing behind her was Daniel Carter, my so-called husband, the military commander who should have protected me, but instead helped his childhood sweetheart steal my name, my future, and eventually my life. Back then, I had foolishly trusted them. When I found out Vanessa had destroyed my admission letter, I had been devastated, thinking justice would be on my side. Daniel played the devoted husband, vowing to punish her by sending her to military boot camp. But behind my back, he forged documents, had her assume my identity, and sent her to Columbia in my place. The betrayal was a slow poison. I didn't realize I'd already been erased from the system until 18 years later, when I went to the Department of Civil Records to renew my ID and was told I didn't exist. No pension, no rights, nothing. I came home dazed, hoping for answers, and instead overheard a conversation between Daniel and Lucas, our adopted son, who, surprise, surprise, turned out to be their biological child. "Dad," Lucas said casually, "when are you finally going to kick that old lady out? She's not even my real mom, and she's an illegal now. You promised I could recognize my real mother after she became an academician." That's when it all made sense. The child I loved, the man I served, the life I sacrificed for it was all built on lies. When I confronted them, they shoved me aside like garbage. And when the system refused to help because I legally didn't exist, I ended up on the streets, starving, freezing, and invisible. That's how I died. Forgotten. Useless. But fate gave me a second chance, and I'll be damned if I waste it. This time, I didn't scream when Vanessa smiled sweetly and asked me how I felt about the college entrance exam. I didn't flinch when Daniel beamed at me and said, "Claire, did you fill out your application? You're definitely going to Columbia, right?" I gave him the calmest smile I could muster and said, "Of course." He grinned like the proud husband he was pretending to be, his eyes filled with a warmth that used to fool me. Not anymore. I saw it now for what it really was: relief that Vanessa would be the one enjoying my future. I remember in my past life, after Vanessa burned my letter, I was livid. I wanted to call the police. Daniel, ever the hero, said, "Don't bother with cops. I'll send her to Fort Jackson myself. She won't get away with it." He never did. He sent her to Columbia instead with my name. And when I tried to explain the situation to the university, they said, "No admission letter, no enrollment." Even when I begged. Even when I tried to retake the exam, I couldn't even register. My life hit a wall, and Daniel, oh so sweetly, told me not to worry. "The college path isn't the only future," he said before leaving for a long mission, conveniently dropping off a baby from the orphanage for me to raise Lucas. I juggled raising him alone, working night shifts, and taking part-time courses, but nothing worked. No school wanted to accept someone with no documents. Every job turned me away. The monthly allowance Daniel sent slowly dried up, and I had to survive on odd jobs and food lines. I remember standing in the freezing cold winter, wearing thin clothes, waiting for aid, only to be told I didn't qualify. Over and over. I thought it was bad luck. I blamed myself. Daniel just kept saying, "Don't worry, Claire. Everything will be okay." Until the day I found out I wasn't just unlucky, I had been erased. Kicked out of existence by the man who claimed to love me. So now, sitting across from Vanessa as she stirs a pot of chicken soup with that same smug smile, I know exactly what she's planning. In my past life, I drank that soup. She cried after I got sick. "I didn't know you were allergic to peanuts, Claire." "I'm so sorry." "Yeah, right." I was bedridden for weeks, and she just moved on like nothing happened. But this time, as she walks toward me with that bowl, I scoop the bottom of the pot and find exactly what I expected: crushed peanuts. "Vanessa," I say, my voice flat, "I'm deathly allergic to peanuts. Did you forget? Or are you trying to kill me?" She freezes. Didn't expect me to call her out, huh? Her eyes go wide, then immediately turn watery. "Oh my God, Claire, you didn't know? I would never." Daniel frowns at me like I'm the one overreacting. You and Vanessa didn't mean it. Why are you being so harsh? Harsh? Oh, honey, if you knew what I was capable of now. Are you going to be the one calling the ambulance or collecting my body? I shoot back. That shuts him up, at least for a second. Then Vanessa turns on the waterworks full force, taking a dramatic step forward, pretending to trip and dump the scalding soup onto my hand. Blisters form instantly. And what does Daniel do? He rushes to her side, lifts her up like she's a fallen angel, and glares at me. Claire, seriously? Overreacting again? Vanessa sobs in his arms. It's okay, Daniel. I get it. She's stressed. She's going to Colombia and has so much on her plate. Then she smirks at me from over his shoulder, like she's already won. My hand is burning, my skin bubbling, and the two of them are acting like I'm the villain here. I leave without another word, go to the clinic myself, and buy burn ointment. The doctor takes one look and asks, "What the hell happened to your hand? Why didn't you come in sooner?" I don't answer. I just smile bitterly and let her bandage it. When I return home, I find the place ransacked. My dowry gold earrings from my Mistress being tried on by Vanessa like some discount Instagram haul. "What the hell are you doing?" I shout. She jumps, then giggles, twirling. "These are pretty," she says. Daniel doesn't even look up from the mirror. "Relax, Claire. She deserves a little something for the trouble you've caused. Consider it compensation." "That was my mother's last gift to me," I spit. "You promised her in her deathbed you'd take care of me." "Why are you acting like such a shrew?" he says. "Don't be difficult." Then Vanessa pipes in. "It's unlucky to wear things from dead people anyway. Kinda gross." Before I can stop her, she flings the earrings out the window. I bolt after them, fall to my knees on the hot pavement, and start searching. People stop to watch. A crowd forms. Vanessa starts crying again, wailing about how I cursed her with dead people's things and how I pushed her. She thinks she's better than me just because she got into Colombia, she screams. She's always been jealous. Suddenly, I'm not the hardworking girl next door. I'm the crazy, abusive wife. The jealous one. The one people whisper about. Daniel walks over, says in front of everyone, "Claire, stop making a scene. Just apologize. Don't make this harder than it needs to be." The world tilts. My head spins. I collapse. And the last thing I hear before blacking out is Vanessa screaming again and Daniel turning his back on me. I woke up in a hospital bed, the fluorescent lights above me buzzing softly, like some kind of cruel reminder that I was still alive, still trapped in this farce, still surrounded by the same people who were slowly trying to erase me again. A nurse came in to change my bandages and gave me a sympathetic look before saying, "The couple who brought you and they seemed like friends, but the woman's got morning sickness. Had to get checked out right away." My heart stopped. Of course. Vanessa Collins was pregnant. Just like last time. Everything was repeating itself, but this time, I wasn't the naive girl who believed that love or loyalty meant anything in that house. I refused to stay another minute. I signed myself out against medical advice, my hand still burning, and walked straight to the nearest post office. On the very first day I woke up in this second life, I had mailed 2 letters, one to Columbia University's admissions office and another to the Federal Ethics Committee. I had no idea whether either of them would get traction, but I had nothing to lose and everything to reclaim. When I left the post office, I went to the bank to try opening a passbook account, fully expecting to be rejected again, and I was. That confirmed it. Daniel had already tampered with my household records just like before. But the more he tried to bury my identity, the more evidence he left behind for me to use. I was counting the days until the exam results came in and the truth could finally start unraveling. I stayed quiet, playing along like nothing had changed. I let him believe I was still the broken little wife who cried herself to sleep when the world didn't play fair. But every time I looked in the mirror, I saw steel behind my eyes. I didn't need justice. I was justice now. When the test results were finally released, I threw a celebration. It wasn't because I cared about the party. I needed an audience. I invited neighbors, friends, anyone who knew how hard I'd studied, who remembered how smart I was. I even invited the local reporters. Vanessa watched with a frozen smile as people came in bearing flowers, gifts, and congratulations. Her fingers twitched with jealousy every time someone called me a brilliant young woman with a bright future. I could feel her rage simmering like acid behind her perfectly curled lashes. She clutched Daniel's arm tighter and tighter until he finally snapped. Claire, don't you think this whole thing is a bit much? It's just an admission letter. That's the point, I replied sweetly. It's not just a letter. It's everything. Before he could retort, the front door swung open, and in walked Principal Harris from Lincoln High, holding a heavy envelope with an official seal.
People gasped.
You'd think Taylor Swift just walked in. Even Daniel's expression softened, thinking it was finally his moment to shine again, husband of the future Ivy Leaguer. Principal Harris, he greeted warmly. Thank you for coming all this way. You could have mailed it, but we're honored. The principal didn't smile. I had to come in person. There's an issue I need to speak with Claire about directly. Oh, I can handle it, Daniel said quickly. I'm her husband. He reached out to take the envelope, trying to play the role of the supportive spouse. Principal Harris hesitated, then handed it over. Everyone leaned in as Daniel opened it, expecting to see a grand admission letter. But all that fell out was a single thin sheet me test scores. Hi, almost perfect. The crowd started whispering again, murmurs of how impressive it was. Until someone asked the obvious question, where's the admission letter? Daniel looked around in confusion. Yeah, where is it? Principal Harris sighed heavily and said, that's why I'm here. Claire scored well enough to get into Columbia University. But we never received her major application. According to our records, she submitted a blank form.
Gasps.
Heads turned. Even Vanessa's perfectly painted face cracked as she lunged forward and snatched the envelope from Daniel's hands. She pulled out the paper like she expected it to change midair. What is this? You said you applied to Columbia. Where is the letter? Her voice rose to a screech, drawing even more attention. I crossed my arms calmly and looked her dead in the eye. I said I could get in. I never said I applied. Silence fell. You could have heard a pin drop. Vanessa's face went red with fury. You did this on purpose, didn't you? You're insane. Why are you so worked up? I asked innocently. It's not your future, right? She looked like she was going to explode, and Daniel stepped in, trying to salvage the scene with that fake, caring tone he loved so much. Claire, sweetheart, why would you throw away your future like this? You can try again next year. We'll support you. Save the act, I snapped. I'm not buying it anymore. Come on, he coaxed. You obviously have the talent. This year just didn't go as planned, but you'll crush it next time. You'll make us proud. Does it even matter how well I do? I sneered. Because no matter what, it ends the same. I get the score, and Vanessa gets to wear my future like a stolen dress. That hit him hard. The crowd murmured again. What does she mean? What's Vanessa got to do with this? Vanessa had the nerve to look confused, like she didn't know exactly what I was talking about. Claire, are you accusing me of something again? You're the one who didn't fill out the form. You're the one who's wasting her talent. Yes, I said loudly enough for everyone to hear. I didn't submit the form. Because I wanted to see how far the two of you would go without it. They both froze. For once, they weren't ready with a comeback. But that moment of awkward silence was shattered by the sudden arrival of another group, men in formal suits, wearing official badges, walking in with cold expressions that silenced the entire room. Daniel stiffened immediately and greeted them with forced politeness. Mr. Anderson? What brings the ethics committee here? The man didn't smile. Commander Carter, we received a complaint. We're here to verify a few things. Complaint? Daniel blinked. Against me? Before Mr. Anderson could answer, Vanessa stepped forward, shrill and desperate. You came just in time. Claire's been acting crazy. She got a high score but didn't submit her form. She probably cheated. You should investigate her, not us. Yes, Daniel jumped in, playing his old role again. She didn't mean any harm, but maybe a little oversight happened. Let's not blow it out of proportion. The men didn't even blink. Mr. Anderson calmly pulled out a file. Actually, we're here about you, Commander. You're being investigated for abusing your authority by illegally altering household records and canceling your wife's registration without consent. The color drained from Daniel's face. That's ridiculous. Who would even? This is a setup. We don't move without evidence, Mr. Anderson replied coolly. According to our documents, you deleted Claire Bennett's identity and had Vanessa Collins registered under her name to enroll in Columbia University. That's a felony. Everyone gasped again. Vanessa's mouth hung open in horror. No, no, no. That wasn't me. I didn't know. It was all him. She was the one pretending to be the commander's wife. I'm innocent. She pointed at me like a rabid animal, her perfectly manicured hand shaking. Arrest her. She's the manipulator. She did this to ruin me. I didn't flinch. I looked straight at Mr. Anderson and said, please also investigate how I was turned into an illegal resident, stripped of all rights, and denied a future just so these two could play house with my name. Mr. Anderson nodded. We'll be taking both of them in for questioning. If what you say is true, Ms. Bennett, you will be fully restored. And just like that, the tide turned. As Vanessa shrieked and Daniel tried to protest, they were handcuffed and escorted out. But this wasn't the end, it was just the beginning. Because I still hadn't shown them my trump card. That's coming next. Even as Daniel and Vanessa were being led out of the house in cuffs, their faces pale and contorted with disbelief, I knew this wasn't over. Not until I reclaimed everything that had been stolen from me and burned the last bridge between me and the people who once called themselves my family. The neighbors were still crowded around the yard, whispering, pointing, and trying to process what they'd just seen. Just a few minutes ago, I was the ungrateful, dramatic wife who threw tantrums over earrings and soup. Now, I was the woman who'd been erased from existence and replaced by a liar who tried to live my life while my own husband helped make it happen. I didn't need their sympathy. I just wanted their memory of the truth to linger. I was about to step back inside when Mr. Anderson turned around and pulled something from his briefcase, a cream-colored envelope with an elegant gold seal. He handed it to me solemnly. There's one more thing, Ms. Bennett. Professor Walker from Columbia asked me to deliver this to you personally. He apologizes for not being able to come himself. I took the envelope, feeling its weight in my hand like it was made of bricks and retribution. He said the research proposal you submitted was exceptional and ahead of its time, Mr. Anderson continued. You've been invited to join his laboratory, bypassing the usual admission process entirely. Welcome to Columbia, Ms. Bennett. My breath caught in my throat. For a moment, I couldn't move. I peeled open the envelope and unfolded the letter slowly, scanning every word as the voices around me faded into white noise. It was real. The invitation, the recognition, the redemption, all of it. Daniel, still cuffed and red-faced, gaped at me like I had just grown wings. How is that even possible? He spat. How did someone like you get in touch with a professor like Walker? I smiled slow, deliberate, and maybe a little cruel. Because I'm not the helpless little wife you turned me into, I said calmly. I've lived this life once before, Daniel. And in that life, I died with regrets. I'm not making the same mistakes twice. Vanessa, who had stopped screaming just long enough to catch her breath, lunged toward me with fire in her eyes. You're lying. You faked it. You probably bribed someone. There's no way someone like you. Enough, Mr. Anderson snapped, his voice like a whip. Slandering a tenured professor carries serious consequences. I suggest you stop talking while you still have a sliver of dignity left. That shut her up. She shrank back, her confidence crumbling like sandcastles in the rain. This isn't fair, she muttered, her eyes darting to Daniel like he could save her. You said you'd marry me, Daniel. You said the baby would have your name. Daniel opened his mouth, then closed it. For once, the military commander had nothing left to command. I looked between them, the two people who had orchestrated my destruction, and pretended I was the problem. I should have felt satisfaction, but all I felt was finality. This was never going to be enough. Not until everything was undone. Speaking of names, I said, my voice slicing through the tension like a blade, Daniel, we're done. I want a divorce. I don't agree, he blurted out before the words were even fully out of my mouth. Claire, I don't agree. I was wrong, okay? I made a mistake, but I can fix it, just give me a chance. You lost that chance the day you forged my name and handed my future to your mistress, I snapped. And this? I pulled out the marriage certificate from the drawer behind me and tore it clean down the middle. This means nothing when the person listed on your household record isn't even me. His face paled as if the air had been punched out of his lungs. You're still my wife in paper. You're still... Not anymore, Mr. Anderson cut in. Now that Claire's identity has been officially restored, the Federal Records Department will nullify the fraudulent marriage registration and reinstate her legal autonomy. Commander Carter, you are no longer her legal spouse. Daniel's knees buckled slightly. He looked like he was about to cry, and part of me wondered if he was finally realizing what he'd thrown away. Too bad it was about 15 years too late. Claire, he whispered, I know I messed up, but please don't leave me. Vanessa, she doesn't mean anything. I only did this for the baby. I wanted a child. I just didn't think. You didn't think I mattered. I finished for him. That's the truth, isn't it? You never saw me as anything more than a placeholder. Someone to keep the house clean, raise your stolen child, and stay quiet while you played house with her. She's pregnant, he argued, grasping at straws. The baby? What about the baby? I stared at him, then at Vanessa, who looked smug again, as if her womb gave her permanent immunity. What about it? I asked flatly. Do you think I care? You could raise it, he tried. You're better with kids. You raised Lucas. You could, I laughed. I actually laughed. You want me to raise your affair baby? Again? No thanks. You made your bed, now rot in it. Mr. Anderson nodded toward his agents, who tightened their grip on Daniel and Vanessa as he gave them the go-ahead to be escorted to their next stop, Federal Holding. Vanessa started crying again, this time louder, like sobbing could erase her crimes. Daniel, do something. You're the commander. You can fix this, right? Tell them it was a misunderstanding. I can't, he muttered, defeated. Not anymore. As they were dragged out the door, Vanessa turned her head and screamed at me, her voice ragged and venomous. You think you won? You'll never be better than me. You're just some sad little woman with a grudge. You'll die alone. I walked to the doorway and called out, and you'll rot behind bars with stretch marks and no pension. Bye, Vanessa. Then I shut the door, turned around, and let out the deepest breath I'd been holding for years. The silence afterward felt like freedom. But it wasn't over yet. I had to rebuild. I had to reclaim more than just my name. I had to take back my dreams. The very next day, I packed my bags and moved into a dorm near Columbia. I started research with Professor Walker's team, and I worked like a woman on fire. I devoured textbooks, ran experiments, and poured all my pain into discovery. My reputation grew. I published papers. I gave talks. I won awards. And most importantly, I became someone whose worth couldn't be denied, erased, or replaced. Years passed. I built a name for myself. And one day, I was invited to return to my hometown to advise on infrastructure development. I stepped off the train, dressed in a sharp blazer and holding a briefcase full of blueprints. And waiting at the platform just like some bad cliché was Daniel Carter. He was thinner, older, shadows under his eyes like bruises, his uniform long gone. Claire, he whispered, almost reverently. You look incredible. I didn't answer. I kept walking. Please, he said, trying to catch up. Just give me a minute. I know I messed up. But you were the best thing that ever happened to me.
Come back to me.
I'll do better. Are you even married to Vanessa? I asked coldly. She had your baby, didn't she?
He winced.
No, I never married her. She's been difficult. But I never stopped loving you. Then why do I smell desperation instead of remorse? I snapped. I was about to leave when, right on cue, Vanessa came charging down the platform, holding a toddler in one arm and screaming profanities at the top of her lungs. She slapped me across the shoulder. You bitch. You ruined my life. You stole my man. He was mine. You can have him, I said. I returned him broken. He's the father of my child, she screamed. And that child doesn't even have a legal identity because of what you did. Daniel tried to calm her, but she smacked him away and collapsed into a sobbing mess on the concrete. You promised me, Daniel. You said we'd be a family. I watched them unravel, those two pathetic souls who once held my fate in their hands. Now, they couldn't even hold themselves together. I turned and walked away, my heels clicking against the pavement like punctuation marks at the end of a sentence. I had work to do. I had a life to live. And as I boarded the train heading north, leaving them behind in the wreckage they created, I heard whispers later that year. Whispers that Daniel had been stabbed during a domestic argument over money. That Vanessa had vanished into the night, taking the child with her, only to fall into a frozen river during a failed escape. I didn't cry. I didn't feel sorry. I just thought to myself, karma doesn't miss. I didn't look back when I stepped off that platform, not when Daniel's voice cracked behind me or when Vanessa collapsed into another one of her public meltdowns, dragging that poor child into her theatrics like a prop she could weaponize, and not when I heard the faint buzz of curious onlookers gathering to gawk at the tragedy of a fallen military man and his scandalous mistress, because I knew that part of my life was over, buried beneath years of lies, betrayal, and regret that didn't belong to me anymore. I had shed it like dead skin, and what remained was someone sharper, stronger, someone who refused to be defined by what others had done to her, someone who chose to rebuild herself from the ashes with nothing but grit and clarity and the fire of a second chance burning behind her ribs like a constant reminder that this time, I was the one writing the rules, not playing by someone else's. So when I got back to Colombia, I threw myself deeper into my research, barely sleeping, barely breathing, working like I owed something to the version of me who had once died on a sidewalk without a name, and as the months passed, I started gaining traction in academic circles, first as the promising newcomer, then the innovator, then the woman who had designed a new predictive model for urban development that no one saw coming, the same model that would eventually be implemented in 3 major cities and get me invited to international conferences. Suddenly, Claire Bennett wasn't just a name they almost erased, she was a name they couldn't ignore, and it was only when I was invited to Washington, D.C. to present at a federal innovation summit that I realized I had become the kind of woman who could look politicians and CEOs in the eye and not flinch, because I had already survived worse than their condescension. So when I walked onto that stage in my navy pantsuit and heels, holding a laser pointer in one hand and a remote in the other, I didn't think about how many nights I cried alone in that tiny apartment Daniel left me in, or how many times Vanessa made me question my own worth. I thought about how many women like me never got a second chance, and how I was going to make mine count for all of us. And after the presentation, as hands reached out to shake mine, as reporters asked questions and researchers handed me cards, I realized something else too. I wasn't just surviving anymore. I was thriving, but success has a way of drawing out the ghosts you thought you buried, and one evening, after I'd returned to my hotel from a charity banquet where I was named one of the top 30 innovators under 30, I found a letter slipped under my door, unmarked, no return address, just my name in familiar, desperate handwriting, and as soon as I opened it, I felt the past creeping back in like a cold wind under the door. Daniel was in prison. It said, not for long, just until the final hearing, but he was sick, something about complications from an untreated ulcer, and he was requesting to see me, claiming he needed closure, claiming he still had things he needed to apologize for, and part of me wanted to burn the letter, to pretend it never came, but the other part, the part that remembered dying with unfinished business, needed to see his face one last time, to look him in the eyes and make sure he knew exactly what he threw away. So I went, not for him but for me, dressed in a crisp white blouse and gray coat, looking more like a prosecutor than a visitor, and when I walked into the visitation room, there he was, thinner than I remembered, face sunken, eyes dull, fingers trembling as he clutched the receiver, and when he saw me, his expression cracked into something between disbelief and shame, like he hadn't truly accepted until that moment that I was really gone, that I had moved on, that I had become someone he could never touch again. Claire, he whispered through the glass, you look so different, and I raised the phone without sitting down, my voice flat as stone when I said, you look exactly the same, like a man who makes excuses. He swallowed, tried to smile, then said, I'm sorry for everything. I really am. I was stupid. I thought I was doing what was best. I never stopped loving you. And I almost laughed, because if this was love, then God help whoever he loved next. You made me disappear. I said, my voice barely above a whisper. You turned me into a ghost and then replaced me like I was nothing. You don't get to call that love. He tried to say something, probably another pathetic justification, but I cut him off. There's no redemption arc for you, Daniel. You can rot here with your regrets. And I hung up before he could respond, walking out of that room with my head high and my heels louder than my heartbeat, because that was the last time I would ever let him be part of my story. After that, I flew back to New York, finalized my faculty contract at Columbia, and bought myself a small condo overlooking the Hudson, a space that was mine, free from memories, free from pain, and for the first time in 2 lives, I felt safe, whole, and completely mine. But fate had one last twist, and it came on a rainy afternoon when I received a call from a detective in upstate New York, asking if I had any connection to a woman named Vanessa Collins and a young boy named Mason, and my heart didn't stop, but it did stumble, just for a second, before I calmly replied, "Not anymore, why?" And the detective sighed, said there'd been an incident at a shelter, that Vanessa had gotten into an argument over food rations, that it turned violent, and in the scuffle, she had pushed a volunteer and fled into the woods with the child during a thunderstorm, only to be found days later, unconscious and hypothermic, clutching Mason's hand as they both lay under a collapsed tree. She survived. Barely, but the boy didn't, and as the detective recited the facts like they were items on a grocery list, I felt nothing, no joy, no sorrow, just a hollow kind of peace. The kind that comes from knowing the universe hadn't forgotten how to balance the scales. And when I hung up, I stood by the window, staring out at the city that had saved me, and whispered, "Rest, little boy, you didn't deserve this." And even though I knew Vanessa would likely never walk again, let alone escape prison once the charges stacked up, I didn't smile, I didn't gloat, I just made a silent promise to myself that no matter what, I would never let pain be my legacy, that I would keep rising, keep fighting, not for revenge, but for the girl I used to be, the one who died crying in an alley with a blistered hand and a heart full of betrayal, and for the woman I had become, the one who now had everything to live for and nothing left to fear. After that call from the detective, something in me closed for good, not in anger or bitterness, but in finality, the kind you feel when a door slams shut behind you and you realize you're standing in sunlight, free, untouched, beyond reach of whatever ghosts you left behind. And I didn't cry for Mason because crying wouldn't bring him back, and it wouldn't undo the fact that his mother treated life like a game board and him like a pawn, just another tool in her twisted strategy to win a war that no longer existed, a war she lost the moment she underestimated the woman she once tried to erase. And I didn't attend the funeral, if there even was one, nor did I read the headlines when they briefly covered the story of the once glamorous mistress of a disgraced military commander who ended up wheelchair-bound and institutionalized after a tragic incident involving her son. Because I had no interest in voyeuristic closure, I already had mine. The day I chose myself over vengeance, the day I turned my pain into power, and now all I cared about was forward motion, the life I had fought to reclaim and rebuild, the purpose that pulsed through every step I took down Columbia's halls, every line I revised in a research proposal, every young woman I mentored who saw a version of herself in me and finally believed she could survive her own darkness too. And maybe that's why it felt so surreal when I was offered the directorship of the Urban Futures Research Lab, a role that would have once seemed unattainable to a girl like Meth Girl who once slept with her ID hidden under her pillow so it wouldn't get lost again, who flinched at the sound of heavy boots because they reminded her of Daniel's hollow promises, who believed being loved meant enduring being silenced. But now that girl had become a woman who wasn't asking for a seat at the table, she was building a new one. And when I signed the contract, I didn't hesitate, not for a second, and just like that, my name, Claire Bennett, was etched into an institution that had once rejected me, not because I wasn't smart enough, but because I didn't have the power to defend my place at the time. And now, with every keynote speech, every published journal, every project launched under my leadership, I wasn't just reclaiming my space, I was creating one for others like me, women who had been buried under lies, bureaucracy, or someone else's ambitions. And maybe that's why, when the invitation arrived to speak at the International Women in STEM Summit in London, I accepted without blinking, even though part of me knew it would stir up interest again in the past I had worked so hard to bury. Because once you become a public figure, people start digging, start asking, start spinning their own versions of your story, and sure enough, within days of the speaker list being published, a few tabloids ran pieces with clickbait titles like, "From Military Wife to Ivy League Star, The Shocking Rise of Claire Bennett," or "Scandal, Betrayal, and Success, How One Woman Beat the Odds." And even though most of it was dramatized garbage, there were slivers of truth that made me feel exposed all over again, like standing in front of a mirror with the curtains wide open. But I didn't flinch, because I knew who I was now, and no headline could reduce me back into someone's footnote. So I boarded that flight to London, heels clicking on marble floors like punctuation marks to my own legacy. And when I took that stage, and stood behind the podium. Looking out over hundreds of women students, professors, COSI didn't speak from a place of revenge or even triumph. I spoke from experience, from truth, from the core of a woman who had been burned to ash and chose to rebuild. And afterward, during the Q&A, someone asked what advice I'd give to my younger self, and I didn't hesitate. I said, trust your voice. The moment you stop shrinking for people who are intimidated by your strength, your real life begins. And the applause that followed wasn't just loud, it was full, like the universe saying finally. And later that evening, while walking back to my hotel through the drizzle with a colleague, I got a call from an unfamiliar number. Normally, I'd let it go to voicemail, but something made me answer. And when I heard the voice on the other end, I froze. It was Lucas, Daniel's son, the boy I raised. Thinking he was adopted, the boy who once called me mom before learning the truth and turning his back on me like I was a stranger. And now here he was hesitating, stumbling over my name, asking if we could talk, if I had time to meet, and part of me wanted to hang up, to cut that final thread, but another part, the stubborn, curious, inexplicably soft part, said yes, not out of guilt or obligation, but because I wanted to know once and for all if there was anything left to salvage. So 2 days later, we met in a small coffee shop off Oxford Street, and when he walked in, I almost didn't recognize him. Taller, older, but still carrying that mix of nervous arrogance that Daniel always had. And when he sat across from me, he looked like he was preparing for battle, but I wasn't there to fight. I was there to finish something, and after a long silence, he finally spoke. I didn't know the truth until after. He said, voice low, eyes fixed on his untouched cup, I thought you were just bitter, that you hated my real mom. But after Mason, I found the files, the forged records, the letters. I didn't know what to do. I listened without interrupting, watched him struggle with the weight of everything he used to be so sure of, and then he looked up at me, eyes glassy. I'm sorry, Claire.
For everything.
You didn't deserve it. And for the first time, I saw him not as the boy who replaced the child I never had, not as Daniel's son or Vanessa's tool, but as a broken young man trying to make sense of the lies he was born into. And I nodded, just once, because forgiveness isn't always a gift you give someone else. It's the weight you decide to stop carrying. And when we parted, he asked if we could talk again sometime. Maybe not as family, but as people trying to find peace. And I said, maybe. Because closure doesn't always look like clean endings. It's often messy, fragile, unfinished, and that's okay, because healing isn't a straight line, it's a spiral, one that sometimes loops back just long enough to remind you how far you've come. And as I boarded the plane back home, watching the clouds blur beneath us, I thought about how many chapters one had closed in silence, how many victories were never posted, how many scars I had learned to wear like armor, and I smiled, not because the story was over, but because for the first time, it finally felt like mine. I used to think closure meant confrontation, like standing face to face with every person who ever broke me and demanding answers, an apology, or some dramatic unraveling of their lies. But life taught me that closure is quieter, softer, like the sound of your own footsteps walking away for the last time, or the stillness that settles into your chest when you realize you no longer care about being understood by those who never saw you clearly in the first place. And after meeting with Lucas, I felt that stillness in a way I hadn't allowed myself to feel before. Not when I reclaimed my name, not when I earned my seat at Columbia, not even when I watched Daniel and Vanessa fall apart from the weight of their own choices. No, it was only now, years later, when the world no longer owed me anything and I had stopped chasing justice like a destination, that I understood what peace actually looked like. And ironically, it came wrapped in silence, in letting go, in living fully for no one but myself. Because even as my story began making its rounds on panels, interviews, and the occasional podcast where they framed me as the resilient woman who rebuilt her life after institutional erasure, I never let them define me solely by what had been done to Maze. The betrayal shaped me. Yes, the rebirth empowered me. But I had become so much more than someone who survived pain. I became someone who created meaning from it. And when my book deal came through, a memoir titled Rewritten, I wasn't afraid to write the hard chapters, the ones where I looked weak or foolish or too trusting, because I finally understood that vulnerability wasn't shameful, it was human. And if telling the truth could help even one woman realize she deserved better, then every word was worth it. And when the book launched, it hit shelves quietly at first, then exploded through word of mouth, not because it was scandalous, though it had its share of jaw-dropping moments, but because it was honest, raw, and Written in my voice, unfiltered, unpolished, but unapologetically memed. Suddenly, I was getting emails from women all over the country, telling me how they saw themselves in my pages, how they had once been Claire Bennett too, invisible and erased, how they were gathering the courage to reclaim their own stories, and that, more than any award or headline, was the real victory. But just when I thought the past had settled for good, a letter arrived at my office, handwritten, elegant, no return. Address again, just my name in gold ink across a pale blue envelope, and I almost laughed because I already knew who it was from, and sure enough, when I opened it, the signature at the bottom confirmed it. Daniel Carter, writing to me from a federal hospice where he was living out his final days, apparently alone, abandoned, no longer a commander, no longer anything, and the words on the page were equal parts apology, regret, and desperate clinging to the version of us that never truly existed. He wrote about the dreams he had for us when we were young, how he thought he could love two women without consequence, how he thought I'd always be there, how watching Vanessa spiral and lose their child broke him more than prison ever did, and I read every word without blinking, without feeling anger or sympathy or even triumph, because this time, his words weren't weapons and they weren't redemption, they were just echoes, fading out. And he ended the letter with one last plea, asking if I could visit, just once, to say goodbye, and I didn't answer right away. I left the letter on my desk, went home, poured a glass of wine, sat on my balcony overlooking the lights of the city I had built my life in, and asked myself what I needed, not what was right or noble or dramatic, but what I truly needed, and I realized I didn't need to see him shriveled in a bed, seeking closure too late, because I had already said my goodbye the moment I walked away from his courtroom years ago. So instead of responding, I folded the letter back into the envelope, sealed it, and placed it in a drawer I didn't open again. And when I read weeks later in a small obit section that Daniel Carter had died quietly in hospice care, no known relatives, no funeral, no fanfare, I closed the article, exhaled slowly, and went right back to work on my next project. Because grief wasn't necessary when what died meant nothing to you anymore. And as for Vanessa, the last I heard, she remained in a long-term psychiatric facility, her mind deteriorating from years of bitterness and guilt, her body weakened from self-neglect, and I never tried to follow up again, because some endings don't need commentary, they just need distance, and mine had finally arrived, not in the dramatic fashion I once fantasized about, but in the quiet comfort of knowing I had outlived the worst of it and found something beautiful on the other side. And one spring evening, I stood in front of a crowd at Columbia's graduation ceremony, watching my own students walk across the stage in their caps and gowns, eyes bright with hope and futures untarnished, and when they handed me a plaque for outstanding contribution to academic empowerment, I held it in my hands and felt the weight of everything it symbolized, not perfection, not closure, but resilience. And when I looked into the crowd and saw Lucas standing in the back, hands in his pockets, nodding at me with a small, proud smile, I nodded back, just once, because forgiveness is not forgetting, it's choosing not to let pain narrate the rest of your life. And after the ceremony, when the lights dimmed and the students cheered, I walked back to my office, placed the plaque on the shelf beside my research awards and first edition of Rewritten, and sat down to begin the next chapter. Not because something had ended, but because I had finally learned how to begin again on my own terms, and this time, no one else was holding the pen but me.